Here on True Crime Stories, it seems like there is a never-ending supply of terrifying and truly disturbing true crime cases. But some of these cases are much, much darker than others. Today, we will be covering 5 of the scariest true crime stories ever told. In January of 2007, the Shetland Islands experienced a truly horrifying crime. Investigators say that famous children's author, Richard Horne, better known as Harry Horse, took his own life alongside his wife Mandy in an apparent romantic pact. But the story that detectives shared with the public, well, it isn't at all what it seems. Born in May of 1960, Richard spent the first decade of his life growing up in a farmhouse called Church Farm Cottage, located in Brandon, Coventry, alongside his parents Derek and Josephine and his 3 sisters. Brandon is known for being a super small village with a population of just about 500 people. Now, this village is home to several incredibly old cottages and pubs, and when you think of old-timey England, this is probably the type of place you think of. Small, quiet, quaint, and super rustic. Richard's family also had a second home in Salcombe, where they would spend their vacations fishing and swimming and hanging out on their boat, which they named the Ormond. By 1970, the family moved to Warwickshire, and it's here that Richard found his true love, storytelling. He would tell his sisters that their house, known as Christmas Hill Farm, was one of the resting spots where Santa Claus stopped to take a rest while delivering Christmas presents to children all over the world. He was always coming up with crazy stories to tell others, and it seemed like he did a great job at it. These were pretty captivating stories that almost always seemed to have some basis in reality, just enough to make them believable. Now, growing up in the countryside gave Richard a sense of freedom, and he loved horseback riding and spending time in nature. In fact, many years later after his passing, tales would be told of how his horse would often come home without him when Richard wasn't ready to head home yet. And that's pretty telling of how much Richard loved the outdoors, when even his own horse would say, "Okay, I think that's enough." As for how he got the pseudonym that he was so well known by, well, it was all thanks to the headmaster at his school, who during roll call accidentally pronounced his surname as Horse instead of Horn, and the moniker stuck for the rest of his life when he decided that he would make it the perfect pen name, Harry Horse. At age 13, he would develop a love for cricket, a popular sport in the UK. He started playing cricket while attending Wreckin College, and here Richard really began to hone his skills as a storyteller and an illustrator, and even won awards for his drawings. After graduating from Wreckin College, Richard found a job at a lawyer's firm, where he started to gain some valuable experience, but for Richard, well, his attention was more focused on the artistic side of his personality, as was evidenced by a decision that he made when he turned 19. A decision that would alter the course of his life forever. While waiting for a train at Coventry railway station one December morning, Richard found himself thinking about the life that lay ahead of him, as he'd been thinking of relocating to Edinburgh. Unable to make up his mind, he chose to leave the decision up to a flip of a coin, with heads sending him back to London and tails meaning that he would move to Edinburgh. The coin landed tails up, and a short while later, he boarded a train that was headed for Scotland. Now, life in Scotland wouldn't be easy, and he didn't really have any jobs lined up as an illustrator, nor did he have anything else going for him for that matter. But he devised a plan. He dressed himself up like a college student and started attending drawing classes, unbeknownst to the rest of the students and the faculty members. He would basically just sneak into class, learn what the professor was teaching for the day, and then sneak out before anyone realized he was there. He basically pirated college courses. Richard used his skills to create a portfolio of his best work, attempting to get a publishing deal by showing it to local publishers. Now, unfortunately, none of them showed much interest, and things were not going the way he had envisioned, and so he had to come up with another cunning ruse. He'd already spoken to the well-known publishing house, Canongate, and he was turned down. But in 1981, he contacted them again, this time posing as his own literary agent. Richard claimed that his client, Harry Horse, was in Edinburgh for a short while, and that he would love to meet up to show off some of his work, and finally, they agreed. At the time, Canongate was owned by its founder, Stephanie Wolfe Murray, and she found him to be just the type of talent that they were looking for. He was given a job as an illustrator for Magus the Lollipop Man, which was authored by Michael Mullen. And shortly after, he supplied the sketches for David Hamilton's The Good Golf Guide to Scotland. In 1986, an updated version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was announced, and Richard also supplied the artwork for that release, which was a pretty major job. He'd certainly made it as an artist by this point, but still unsatisfied with his life's trajectory, he decided to try his hand at publishing a book of his own. But Richard, he could have never guessed what the future had in store for him. Richard wrote his first book, entitled The Ogopogo: My Journey with the Loch Ness Monster. And quite unbelievably, his first efforts saw him receiving a Scottish Arts Council Book Award. This did his career a world of good, and soon he was producing many more popular children's books, most of which included animal characters. His book, The Last Polar Bears, saw him make his debut on the small screen as it was made into an animated movie. And shortly after, two of his other books, The Last Cowboys and A Friend for Little Bear, also made appearances on television. And Richard's career was now in full swing. He'd finally made it as a published author and illustrator, and his life was shaping up to be exactly what he had always dreamed of. By 1989, Richard had started to explore other aspects of his creativity, and had started his own band, touring across the country. In fact, they were in the midst of a tour in the Shetlands when he met Mandy Williamson, the girl who would eventually become his wife. The two got married the following year and found an apartment in Edinburgh where they lived with their dog named Rue, who Richard would later feature in many of his stories. Now, the apartment didn't offer much room, but they were happy to make it work, and Richard's friends would describe Mandy as the counterpoint to his volatile nature. Basically, she helped even out Richard's wild nature and calm him down to a certain extent, but Richard was still hungry. See, Richard had a serious love for his dog Rue. He was an animal lover through and through. The two could be seen everywhere together and even took him to business meetings. In fact, Rue would also be the catalyst for the next stage of Richard's career. After Richard and Mandy were married for about a year or two, Richard began to feel that his books featuring Rue weren't getting enough attention. Thus, he and Rue entered the offices of the Scottish newspaper, Scotland on Sunday, to complain about their lack of coverage of his books. Luckily, he'd brought several of his illustrations with him, and upon seeing them, the newspaper's editor suggested that he start working for them as a freelance political cartoonist. And while it was a pretty drastic change of pace for Richard, well, he accepted the offer. He would stay in this role for the next 6 years, drawing caricatures of famous politicians and the situations that they found themselves in at the time, quickly making a name for himself as one of the biggest political cartoonists of his generation, as his drawings could be seen in well-known newspapers that included The Guardian, The Independent, The Telegraph, and The Times. His reputation as a talented illustrator and cartoonist had now started to spread, and he even created the cover artwork for the New Yorker magazine on 2 occasions, while also drawing a satirical cartoon for The Scotsman on a weekly basis. But Richard and Mandy's life together, well, it wasn't as perfect as it seemed from the outside. After 18 years of marriage, it would all come to an end thanks to one unthinkable act carried out by Richard. By 2004, Richard and Mandy had decided to move back to the Shetland Islands in Scotland. This decision came after they received the unfortunate news that Mandy was suffering from a seriously aggressive form of multiple sclerosis, or MS. The change in Richard's demeanor from this point on is a testament to how much he loved his wife, as he became ever more depressed at her failing health, and before long he'd started to use illegal substances to cope with her loss of mobility and their lives together. His family would later reveal that he found it increasingly difficult to see her struggling with the condition, and it caused him to fall into a deep, deep depression. By 2004, Mandy's condition had worsened to the point where she was barely able to talk, and she had to receive constant care, which caused Richard a great deal of worry. In fact, he once commented to friends that he hated having to bathe and change his wife every day. Now, it's unclear if he hated doing this in general, or if he hated that her health had failed her, but I tend to believe it's most likely the latter, as Richard was more than willing to do whatever was necessary for his wife. Though, admittedly, Richard hated the fact that the two had moved back to the Shetlands to be closer to Mandy's family, as it was a very quiet and calm area, and Richard had grown used to the hustle and bustle of London over the years, thriving in the chaotic lifestyle. Those he spoke to about his concerns took it as a sign that Richard was still very much in love with his wife, and that the decline in her health was starting to take a toll on him. But these days, there are many people who disagree with this sentiment. See, since Richard was still taking illegal substances during this time, his behavior had grown ever more erratic, and it's believed that he started resenting the fact that he had to look after Mandy while living in a comparatively isolated area. By this point, Mandy had grown from being the center of his world to being more of an obstacle in his way. At least that's the opinion of some people looking back on Richard's life. Richard had now become prone to fits of rage, and one social worker would report that he became so angry during a discussion about Mandy's rights to disability benefits that he punched a hole in a wall in their house. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. Richard's mental health would only get worse from here, and it didn't take long before it reached a boiling point. And Richard, well, he finally snapped. In the days and weeks before the crime, Richard retreated further into depression, and his addiction got much worse. He would eventually cut off all contact with his family, an act that's always worrisome when someone's dealing with depression and struggling to come to terms with difficult circumstances. He did keep in contact with some of his friends, though, and in January of 2007, he invited two of their friends over to their place for dinner. But the evening didn't exactly go to plan, and Richard was acting strangely all night. The two friends would later tell investigators that Richard had, at some point in the evening, used an unspecified medication, after which he became agitated and on edge, which caused them pretty serious concern. They added that after taking the substance, he became more animated than normal, and he was walking around the house muttering to himself, at one point saying, "It's a wonderful night for a killing." Prior to this, Richard had been, for the most part, his normal, happy self, but now they could hardly recognize him. What worried them most of all is that they noticed that Mandy seemed to be afraid of him. As they were getting ready to leave, she asked him to stay over for the night since she didn't want to be left alone with him. The friends declined the offer, likely because they didn't want to get involved in the couple's marriage issues, but also probably because they didn't want to deal with Richard's strange behavior anymore. This guy was clearly out of his mind at this point. After turning down Mandy's offer, the friends left and didn't think much else about the situation, believing it would all blow over soon enough. But by the following morning, a couple of the friends returned to the house as one of them had left a piece of clothing there the night before. But when they walked through the front door, they were met with a terrifying, horrific sight. The friends had just walked into a crime scene. As the friends entered the couple's home, they were immediately caught off guard. As they stepped into the entryway of the home, they were met with a grisly sight. The couple's dog and cat had both lost their lives, and it was clear the damage done was intentional. The friends didn't know what to think, and they immediately began calling out for Richard and Mandy. Realizing that something was very wrong, they rushed into Richard and Mandy's bedroom, and their hearts sank. The couple was found lying side by side on their bed, both deceased. And this is where the case gets really strange, and many people are still left wondering what the motive was for the story that was concocted by investigators after they learned of the couple's passing. Since Mandy's family was living close by, they were quickly informed of her passing, though it would take several days before Richard's family ever received the news. When they finally did, the details sounded like something out of a fairy tale. The police told both families that Richard and Mandy had attempted to end Mandy's life via an overdose, since she was suffering too much to carry on, and Richard could no longer stand watching his wife's health deteriorate. But tragically, the attempt failed, and this left the couple more depressed and desperate than ever before. The media reported that they decided to enter into a pact that would bring an end to the suffering for both of them, and it was even hailed as a, quote, true Romeo and Juliet tale. They were portrayed as a loving couple who couldn't face the world without each other, and that they decided that they would rather end their lives together than have to live the rest of their lives alone. As one would imagine, both families were devastated at hearing the news, but they accepted the version of events that detectives had offered them, since in their minds, there was no reason for them to hide the truth. But the thing is, they would eventually learn that the couple's passing was anything but romantic, though it would be more than 6 months after the incident that the truth would finally be revealed to the public. Those who knew Richard and Mandy were horrified to learn that they had taken their lives after the dinner party that evening. As awful as this already was, the details that emerged thereafter were even more shocking. It would turn out there was no pact. It wasn't an act carried out as a romantic gesture, and there was no agreement between husband and wife that this had to be done. Instead, whispers began to spread about how Richard had grabbed a knife from the kitchen and attacked Mandy in a tragic act of violence. We know that this wasn't a consensual act since investigators found defensive wounds on her arms and hands, and it would soon be revealed that he jabbed her as many as 30 times before bizarrely turning the weapon on himself. But before he did so, the knife that he was using broke during the attack, which just shows the ferocity of the situation. Imagine the amount of force that it takes to break a metal blade. Thus, Richard went back to the kitchen, grabbed another weapon, and then continued the assault until Mandy's life was over. The coroner's report would state that Richard had 47 self-inflicted wounds before he too lost his own life. The doctor who attended the crime scene was so shocked by what he found there that he had to take time off of work, stating it was the worst crime scene he had ever witnessed with his own eyes. While still under the impression that the couple had lost their lives in some sort of romantic pact, Richard's family agreed that they should be buried together. But when Mandy's family learned what had actually occurred that night, they were understandably outraged at how the case was handled by the authorities. More specifically, they were outraged that investigators had outright lied to them about the state of the crime scene. Mandy's father made it clear that he wanted everyone to know what had happened to his daughter, since Richard had been painted as being some sort of martyr by ending his wife's suffering and then claiming his own life in some sort of romantic gesture. At a press conference held after the true details of the crime were revealed, Mandy's father stated, quote, "This was no pact, it was murder. Mandy had arranged to go with her mother to the dentist the morning they were found. She was not planning on ending her own life." In the aftermath of these revelations, Richard's mother spoke to the Sunday Times newspaper, and surprisingly, she took aim at Mandy and Mandy's family, revealing that she never liked Mandy in the first place. She claims that when attending the couple's wedding, Mandy's family had failed to arrange flowers for the church ceremony, as they had agreed to do. And she took offense to the fact that she and the rest of the family hadn't been invited back to Richard and Mandy's house for the second half of the reception. Now, this may sound like petty squabbles between a bride and the groom's family, and this is commonplace, right? But that's not the full story. Richard's mother added that Mandy was a very difficult person to get along with, saying she was quick to criticize Richard when he was in the midst of doing something that she didn't agree with. She claims that Mandy would refuse to wash his cricket uniform, since she didn't like any of the other players' wives. She was also critical of the way that he was raised, as well as the schools that he attended. Richard's mother also says that she had to walk on eggshells around Mandy because she was so volatile and would fly off the handle at the slightest mention of anything she didn't agree with. But again, you could easily chalk this up to a groom's mother not liking his bride. Again, this is super commonplace. It should also be mentioned that the rest of Richard's family didn't necessarily agree with his mother's statements, though, just to add a bit of context. In fact, the rest of Richard's family loved Mandy just as much as Richard did. But still, it gets worse. According to Mrs. Horn, Richard and Mandy had both been taking illegal substances in the months leading up to the incident. Mandy had been doing so to relieve the pain that she was in as her health was failing, and Richard eventually joined in to help cope with the impending loss of his wife. And while most of us may not agree with this decision, you have to admit it's somewhat understandable. Several of the couple's friends contacted Richard's family after the truth of the crime was finally revealed, saying how much they liked Mandy and how they were struggling to come to terms with how Richard could have carried out such a violent and unexpected crime. This heartbreaking tragedy took everyone by complete surprise, and considering how many people spoke lovingly of the couple, heck, even two of their friends who had dinner at their house that night couldn't have predicted this was about to happen, well, it was just a shock to everyone. Now, rather obviously, there have been many people who are critical of how the police handled this case. Obviously, there was no point in lying to the family about what had actually taken place here. It's understandable they may have wanted to spare the family from the heartache and burden of knowing how the crime really unfolded, but that burden was the family's to bear. It's not up to the police to decide who gets to grieve a loss or how they grieve it. When questioned about this in interviews by the media, The Shetland police defended their handling of the case, stating that any suggestion that they attempted to hide certain details of the crime from members of the two families or the public was completely unfounded, though no one has been able to explain why Richard and Mandy's deaths were portrayed as a romanticized pact to end their own lives, when that clearly wasn't the case. It's obvious from this statement alone, the police are just outright lying. When preparations were being made for Richard and Mandy to be buried, Richard's sisters, Kay and Mary Ann, revealed what they thought of the horrific crime and the events leading up to it. They believed that Richard had purposefully started distancing himself from his family since he'd been planning to end Mandy's life, as well as his own, for quite some time. They also speculated that he only did this to strengthen his resolve, or else he would have been made unable to follow through with his plans. Basically, if he would have maintained contact with his family throughout the months leading up to the crime, he may have felt too much guilt and been unable to actually go through with it. Speaking to a reporter, they also suggested that the move back to the Shetlands would have played a major role in Richard's state of mind, and that it would have added to his feelings of despair. Richard obviously didn't want to be there, and this was painfully obvious. Now, it should be noted that when the sisters made these statements, they were still under the impression that the couple had willingly taken their lives together. So while they knew that Richard had taken Mandy's life, they didn't know at this point in time that he had done so against her will. It would only be when they traveled to the Shetlands for the funeral that they were briefed on the actual events that took place. In the end, no one will ever truly know what was going through Richard's mind when he decided to end Mandy's life, as well as his own. But this case shows that anyone's life can be irrevocably changed at any time, and it's up to each of us to decide how we deal with those changes. At some point in our lives, we're all going to get horrible news, but that doesn't mean we have to go to the lengths that Richard did to try to make things right. It's not our job to play God. It's our job to make the best with what we have. When reading statements from people who knew the couple, it becomes clear that there was never any doubt that the two truly loved each other. But what drove Richard to carry out such an unthinkable crime? Well, we may never know. Some people believe he did it because Mandy's suffering had become too much for him to bear, while others think he may have been in the midst of some psychosis due to the substances that he was using. The truth is, we just don't know. Tokyo, the city of neon lights, endless energy, and a heartbeat that never slows down. But beneath the surface of this vibrant metropolis, a chilling darkness lurks. In May of 2012, the city's bustling rhythm was shattered by a shocking and tragic event that left a sickening mark on both Japan and Ireland, ending in an innocent woman losing her life. This is not just a tale of crime. It's a story of loss, justice, and the quest for truth in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Nicola Furlong was born on December 17, 1990, to her parents Andrew and Angela, in a picturesque village in County Wexford, Ireland. Nicola had two younger sisters, Andrea, who was 3 years younger, and Hannah, who was 9 years younger, and she was close to both of them. Growing up in a close-knit community in Wexford, Ireland, Nicola was known for her bright smile, warm, stunning, and generous personality, and had an infectious zest for life. From an early age, Nicola showed a passion for music and sports. She played the piano beautifully and was an avid athlete, often seen playing soccer and running in local competitions. Nicola's dedication and hard work extended to her studies as well. She excelled academically and was determined to make the most of every opportunity that came her way. After graduating from high school in Ireland, Nicola enrolled as a student at Dublin University to pursue a degree in international business and language. But when an opportunity came up to continue her studies abroad, her father Andrew suggested she go, specifically to Japan, since she enjoyed taking the course so much. Her love for exploring new cultures and languages led her to take up an exchange program in Tokyo's Takasaki City University of Economics back in 2011. This opportunity was a dream come true for Nicola, combining her academic ambitions with her love for travel and new experiences. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she just had to take it, even though it meant being away from her family and friends and her boyfriend for a full year. Tokyo was a huge adjustment, one that Nicola may have underestimated. At first, she struggled to find her way living in Japan, The area she was living in was about 2 hours away from Tokyo, which is stunning in terms of its beauty, but being outside of a major city means that it offers a more traditional Japanese lifestyle, meaning many people don't speak English like they may in a more modernized area like Tokyo. Beyond that, the time Nicola spent missing her family overshadowed much of her experience in Japan. While she enjoyed spending time in Japan, she was mostly just looking forward to finishing up her year in the exchange program and getting back home to her family. Nicola eventually adapted to her new surroundings, making friends and immersing herself in the vibrant Japanese culture. She was known by the locals to be kind-hearted and approachable. Nicola was more than just a student. She was a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her love for music continued in Tokyo as well, where she often attended concerts and enjoyed exploring the local music scene. Her weekends were filled with adventures, from visiting historic temples to trying new foods, and she often documented her experiences in a blog that kept her friends and family back home updated on her journey. But Nicola would make one final blog post before her future changed forever. And that's because in the blink of an eye, everything Nicola had worked so hard to build, all the relationships she'd formed in Japan, the memories she had with new friends and new family, they would all vanish in the blink of an eye, when Nicola unexpectedly had her life stolen. In May of 2012, Nicola was just a couple of months away from returning home to Ireland. On the night of May 23, 2012, Nicola and her friend, another girl from Ireland who's not been identified, decided to attend a Nicki Minaj concert in Tokyo. It was supposed to be a fun night out with friends, an escape from their busy college schedules. But little did they know that this night would take a dark and sinister turn. Nicola and her friend traveled to Tokyo by train, and it was about a 2-hour trip. The plan was to go to the concert and then spend the rest of the night visiting bars in the Tokyo area, catching the first train back to school the next morning. But while they were looking at a transit map and making plans, they were approached by two American men, 19-year-old Richard Hines and 23-year-old James Blackston. The men explained to the ladies that they were visiting Japan from the States, striking up a conversation. While the girls had no idea who these men were and didn't show too much interest in them at first, they were probably just happy to have met someone who could speak fluent English. Richard was from Memphis, Tennessee, and he was there working as a professional musician, while James flew in from LA and was there as a professional dancer. The men appeared super friendly, and because they were familiar with the nightlife of the city, they offered to help the young women find their way around. Nicola and her friend thought they seemed friendly enough, so they agreed. The four of them eventually took off in a taxi together. As they were riding around town, Richard and James let the two ladies know that they had 2 rooms booked and paid for at the Keio Plaza Hotel in the Shinjuku district, an area known for its vibrant nightlife. The men offered to let the girls have one of the rooms for the night, free of charge. But Nicola and her friend declined, saying that they'd be fine to just stay up and take the train back in the morning. The thing is, unbeknownst to the girls, the Shinjuku district, while famous for its nightlife, also has a dark side. Amidst its neon-lit streets and bustling entertainment hubs, this was an area known for its seedier elements, with a much higher crime rate than the rest of Japan. While the girls were just happy to have made a couple of new friends, they had no idea about the twist of fate they were about to walk right into. As the group made it to Shibuya, they decided to visit the Scramble Bar. Nicola and her friend bought the first round of drinks, and Richard and James bought the second round, which was shots of tequila. But Nicola's friend reported that the shot of tequila hit her differently than usual. One minute she was sitting there enjoying drinks and conversation, and the next minute she blacked out. This is where the events of the evening become somewhat of a blur. But just before 1 a.m., security footage from a taxi showed Richard and James putting the 2 heavily intoxicated women into the back of a car before getting in and telling the driver to take them to Keio Plaza Hotel in Shinjuku, about a 10 or 15 minute drive away. Once they arrived at the hotel, things took a turn for the worst. Nicola and her friend were separated, each going to different rooms with one of the men. It's believed at this point both women were still completely powerless against these men, and they didn't really even have a full understanding of what was going on. The lobby of the Keio Plaza Hotel has, for years, been a symbol of Tokyo's prosperity and openness, where tourists mix with local travelers on their way up to the Twin Towers overlooking the city center. But as the night of May 23rd turned into the early hours of May 24th, the vibrant energy of Tokyo's Shinjuku district began to fade. In a hotel room high above the bustling streets, an unthinkable crime was unfolding. Nicola Furlong, a bright and adventurous young woman, had unknowingly stepped into a nightmare. It was around 12:50 a.m. when the men, alongside Nicola and her friend, arrived at the hotel. Security footage revealed that Richard and James clearly understood just how intoxicated Nicola and her friend truly were. In fact, in this footage, the men can be heard taunting the girls, laughing and gloating about what they planned to do to them when they got them back to their hotel rooms. When the taxi arrived at the hotel, the girls were so far gone they couldn't even walk. The men ended up having to ask hotel staff for 2 wheelchairs so that they could take the girls up to the rooms. The hotel workers happily obliged, without so much as a second thought. Thus, these girls were wheeled away by these 2 men, with neither of the girls knowing that, for one of them, this night would be their last. In the bizarre security footage, we can see the girls being wheeled away completely against their will. Richard was in control of Nicola, while her friend was being wheeled away by James. At approximately 3:20 a.m., a noise complaint was called in, and the hotel manager on duty went to room 1427, the room where Richard was staying, to see what was going on. He knocked on the door a couple of times, but when no one answered, the manager entered the hotel room and discovered Nicola lying face down on the floor. It was clear something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. Emergency services were then called to transport both Nicola and her friend, who was found in the other room, to a nearby hospital. But despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Nicola never regained consciousness. Shortly after 3:55 a.m., it was announced that Nicola was gone. The initial cause of her passing was unclear, leaving her family and friends in a state of shock and grief. After all, she'd just spoken with her friends and family about how happy she was to be attending the concert that evening. She was over the moon about it. How, in such a short span of a few hours, could things have gone this badly? Thankfully, it wasn't difficult for the police to track down who had done this to these 2 young ladies. After all, the hotel rooms were registered under the names of Richard Hines and James Blackston, the 2 American men who they'd been at the bar with that night. The men were very quickly tracked down, with both of them being arrested and taken in for questioning. At first, the men were not charged with taking Nicola's life. They were merely charged with assaulting the one woman in the back seat of the taxi that they'd taken earlier that night. Police had strong suspicions that both women had been dosed before they fell unconscious, but at this point this was merely a theory. A toxicology sample was taken from Nicola, and investigators were waiting on the results of this analysis before placing any more serious charges against the 2 men. While this was being carried out, an autopsy was being conducted on Nicola to determine specifically how she lost her life. These results wouldn't come back until the 15th of June, and they were surprising to put it lightly. Professor Kenichi Yoshida carried out the autopsy and reported back that Nicola had not overdosed. Instead, she had her breathing restricted, most likely with an object, something soft like a towel. It was added that Nicola likely didn't lose her life quickly, and it most likely took several minutes and great amounts of distress, which likely lended to the noise complaint that was called in by the other hotel patrons. Now that the police had determined exactly how Nicola had lost her life, they were ready to step the investigation up a notch, and they officially placed first-degree charges against both James and Richard. The crime sent shockwaves through both Japan and Ireland. Nicola's family, devastated by the loss, demanded justice for their beloved daughter. Her mother Angela and father Andrew traveled to Tokyo, enduring the painful process of dealing with their daughter's passing in a distant and unfamiliar country. They sought answers and accountability, hoping that the Japanese legal system would deliver justice for Nicola. Thankfully, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police responded quickly, treating the case with the seriousness that it demanded. They gathered evidence, sent in security footage for forensic analysis, and carefully pieced together the events of that fateful night. The hotel room was thoroughly searched, revealing clues that pointed directly to Hines and Blackston. But the case wouldn't be so simple. These men, though clearly responsible, were not going down without a fight. On the night that Nicola lost her life, detectives say that Richard's actions were most likely driven by a mixture of intoxication and simple aggression. Having grown up in a very rough home environment, Richard had a lot of hatred and resentment towards others. As the investigation revealed, he'd grabbed a hold of Nicola in a fit of rage, an act of unthinkable violence that left her family and friends in utter devastation. What specifically caused him to fly off the handle is still a matter of debate. We don't know if Nicola may have said something that triggered him, or if he was already acting violently before even getting Nicola to the hotel room. But whatever the case, Nicola received the brunt of his aggression and paid dearly for it. While all of this was unfolding, James was in the other room having his way with Nicola's friend. Richard Hines would deny purposefully claiming Nicola's life. He claims that their actions that night were completely consensual, but that things got out of hand when Nicola lost her life as a result. He insists that whatever happened to Nicola, it was an accident. But police were not buying this. As the case went to trial in March of 2013, even more details emerged that admittedly didn't really make the situation any better, and they merely confirmed investigators' darkest suspicions. The prosecution alleged that on the night in question, Hines and Blackston dosed Nicola and her friend without their knowledge, intending to bring them back to their hotel rooms against their will. This much has basically been confirmed. But according to Professor Yoshida, who performed Nicola's autopsy, Nicola had scratch marks on her neck, indicating that she'd tried to fight back against her attacker and likely did so for quite some time. Yoshida says that the method used to claim Nicola's life, it was monstrous. This man would have had multiple minutes to just stand there staring into the eyes of his victim as she fought back, desperately clinging to life. It was brutal, utterly brutal. This was not something that could have in any way been an accident. Nicola's friend was called to testify during the trial, and she did her best to piece together the events of that evening, leading up to the shot of tequila that caused her to pass out. She spoke of how the men offered to take the girls back to their hotel rooms, but that both of the girls declined, as they were in committed relationships. The men acted as if they were going to back off, but they never did. This is when the tequila came out, and Nicola's friend says she lost consciousness just minutes after taking the shot. She has no memory of what happened after this, and the next thing she knows is waking up in a hospital bed. The defense team painted Richard Hines as an honest and decent man who simply wanted to help these two young ladies get to a safe space, like their hotel room, so that they could sleep off the effects of the alcohol they'd been drinking. But investigators were able to dig up CCTV footage from the cab ride to the hotel, in which the men could be heard excitedly shouting about how these girls had, quote, fallen into their lap. As they were looking at the two women and chatting about what they were going to do to them, they even bumped fists with one another. This was by no means any sort of accident. This was calculated and planned down to the finest of details. Worse yet, as investigators continued digging into these two men's pasts, they found out this was not the first time that James had been pinned for a crime just like this. In fact, less than a month before Nicola lost her life, James was accused by another woman of spiking her drink and taking advantage of her. When Richard was given a chance to defend himself, he painted Nicola as nothing more than a bar hopper who was looking for someone who could easily get her drunk. He basically suggested that she left her school that night with every intention of getting blackout drunk, and suggested that she was willing to set up shop with whoever would get her the drunkest the quickest. I don't think you need me to tell you that this could not have been further from the truth. For me, I think the most heartbreaking part of this entire trial was when the prosecution showed the footage from the hotel lobby. These two girls were desperate for someone to step up, literally anyone to help them out of this bad situation they found themselves in. But not one single hotel worker bothered to ask these girls if they were okay. No one stepped up and said, hey, maybe we should call somebody because these girls are clearly too drunk to even know what's going on. Not one person offered any assistance. They just got them in the wheelchairs they requested and even went as far as to help load the girls into the wheelchairs. It's just sickening, and I can't wrap my head around it. It just truly blows my mind. Nicola's family was present at the trial, and they had to sit through all of the awful retellings of what happened to their daughter. They would deliver a victim impact statement in which they requested the judge hand down the gravest possible punishment. But unfortunately for them, the punishment that this man would receive would be little more than a slap on the wrist. See, at this point in Japan's history, Richard, who was 19, was still considered a minor. The problem is that minors cannot be legally sentenced to the same level of punishment as adults. While these laws have changed in more recent years, that really doesn't matter in Richard's case, because in the end, He was found guilty, but he could only be sentenced to a maximum of 5 to 10 years in prison, and he's now a free man. As for his partner in crime, James Blackston, well, he was convicted of assaulting Nicola's friend, but his sentence was even lighter. He was sentenced to 3 years of hard labor, being released in 2015. He then returned to the United States and continued his career as a dancer, with his crimes in Japan being little more than a footnote in an otherwise great life. These two men have proven themselves to be serial criminals, and they just got away with it. In the years following Nicola's passing, her family has worked tirelessly to honor her memory, creating scholarships in her name and advocating for the safety of young travelers abroad. In the wake of this tragedy, there has been some positive changes aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Awareness campaigns about travel safety, particularly for young women abroad, have gained traction among students in the Tokyo area. Hotels in Tokyo and other major cities have implemented stricter security measures to protect their guests, hoping to prevent situations like this from ever unfolding again. These steps, while small, do represent a collective effort to ensure that no family has to endure the pain that Nicola's family has suffered. Not to mention the pain that her friend now has to live with on a daily basis. Nicola's family has shown incredible courage in sharing their story, hoping that Nicola's experience will serve as a warning and a lesson to others. They continue to celebrate Nicola's life, remembering her for the vibrant, loving, and talented young woman that she was. At the end of this story, we're left with just one main takeaway. Justice was served, but sometimes that's simply not enough. These two men should have spent the rest of their lives paying for what they did to these girls. But instead, they're out there living their best life, while Nicola's family is left in shambles, and her friend is left to sift through the ashes of the life that she once knew. For both of these families, every semblance of safety and security was ripped clean out of their hands. They will never know true peace again. But for the two men who forced this fate on these women, they just get to move on with their lives and act like the whole thing never happened. And somehow, we're supposed to accept this as some form of justice? I don't think so. Many people have an unspoken flock rule. Wherever they go together. This is particularly true for many female friend groups, whether that's going to a public bathroom in a restaurant, or a club, or going home late at night. Many people just feel safer that way. This is particularly true when you're in a location that you're not too familiar with. But what happens when a woman familiar with an area leaves alone in broad daylight? Well, it's considered safe. Or is it? 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte thought that she was safe when she went for a jog on a Sunday afternoon on August 7th of 2016 on a familiar trail very close to her mother's home. Everyone thought that Vanessa would leave and come back very soon. But when afternoon darkened into the evening and there was still no sign of Vanessa, her family and the community of Princeton, Massachusetts weren't expecting Vanessa's body to be found half a mile from her home. The case of Vanessa Marcotte is a petrifying example of danger being anywhere at any time. A case that took almost 6 years to reach completion is grueling and baffling and leaves many women all over the world feeling unsafe, even in places that they know like the back of their hand. If you're watching this video, that means you're probably interested in true crime. And if you're interested in true crime, then I'd be willing to bet you'd be interested in this channel, True Crime Stories. So do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future cases. Vanessa Teresa Marcotte was born on June 17, 1989. Vanessa was an only child, and she did exceptionally well in school. She loved playing sports and was an avid adventure seeker. Vanessa loved spending time in nature and in the outdoors, and she was very active. Vanessa and her family even took vacations to several beaches, mountains, and resorts, and she loved connecting with nature. Vanessa also was a kind-hearted girl with a love, generally, for life. Her family and friends defined her as a person they could really rely on. Vanessa was also very responsible and loved helping and was fond of her family. On the outside, Vanessa had the perfect life, but that wouldn't last for too long. See, Vanessa's parents, while she was still young, decided to call it quits on their marriage. Things weren't working out, and their once loving marriage had run its course in their eyes. Now, this was a major change for Vanessa, and you would think that it would have had a massive impact on her emotional stability. But Vanessa, even after her parents divorced, was super close to them both. Yes, they weren't together, and Vanessa knew that their family dynamic had changed forever, but even so, she was still the bubbly, outgoing, and loving person that everyone knew her as. But let's be honest, grief comes in many colors. None of us really know what sort of darkness may have been lingering beneath the surface. Fast forward to graduating from high school. Vanessa attended Boston University and pursued a degree in communication there. Vanessa loved and excelled at her major, so much so that she graduated with honors in 2011 and got a job straight out of university. After graduating from college, Vanessa worked at WordStream, an online marketing software company. Not only this, she worked at Vistaprint to gain experience in the corporate industry and the communication business. That's because she had a bigger goal and wanted to get her hands on her dream job. See, Vanessa saw herself working for the tech giant Google, and to her surprise, she soon got the jobs she so desperately wanted in 2015. Vanessa moved to New York City to work as an account manager at Google. She was over the moon when she got the opportunity, although that did mean that she had to move away from her family to chase her dream, which was certainly a bit of a tragic decision for her. For Vanessa, that was a gutting feeling because as an only child, she loved her family and wanted to spend as much time with them as possible. But she also wanted to start her professional journey in her dream company. Despite being extremely busy with her job in New York, Vanessa always made bi-monthly visits to Princeton, Massachusetts to visit her mother and her aunt. Vanessa's mother, Rosanna, really looked forward to these meetings, and in August of 2016, she was beyond excited to see her daughter again. Princeton was a very tiny rural town tucked away in Worcester County. It had a population of just under 3,500 people, so it was a town where everyone knew everyone. It was also a relatively safe town, so much so that the last major recorded criminal activity occurred almost 30 years ago. So it's safe to say that Princeton was a town that was secure for anyone. But that would soon change in the most horrific way when this quaint town became a haunting and terrifying place, and the whole community was shocked to their core. On August 7th, 2016, while staying over at her mother's house, Vanessa went out for a run. It was an ordinary Sunday, and later that day, Vanessa had to catch a bus to go back to New York to get started with yet another busy work week. Vanessa still had some unpacking left, but could never say no to a run. Being athletic, Vanessa loved to do yoga, run, and take jogs during the day to get her workout in. And August 7th was no exception. Vanessa's mother's home was on Brook Station Road, close to a walking trail. 27-year-old Vanessa left her mother's house in the early afternoon for her daily jog. Now, this wasn't something out of the ordinary for Vanessa. She was always going to jog on this trail whenever she came to visit her mother. But the afternoon turned to evening, and there was still no sign of Vanessa's return. She wasn't picking up her phone, and Rosanna got worried, since Vanessa still had to pack and leave to catch her bus for New York on time. This behavior was extremely out of the ordinary for Vanessa. She was a responsible woman who was never late and didn't have a habit of forgetting important things. So Vanessa's disappearance and silence started eating away at Rosanna. By the evening, Rosanna called the police, and Vanessa was officially a missing person. Right from the get-go, the police were active in the search for Vanessa. This is a small town we're talking about, and if Vanessa were somewhere injured and in dire need of help, the police would do everything to get to her on time. There were civilians, police officers, and even canine units trying to look for Vanessa. The police wanted to search the area where Vanessa went, aka the jogging trail, as it was heavily wooded and had dense vegetation the deeper the woods went. At around 8:20 p.m., even though it was getting dark, the search for Vanessa was still on. This was until one of the police dogs picked up a scent trail that led the officers to the most unexpected and tragic scene that they'd been to in over 30 years. Just off the street, less than half a mile away from Vanessa's mother's home, a body was found in the woods. It was the lifeless body of a woman who was completely disrobed, had burn marks on her limbs, face, and stomach, and had unfortunately also been assaulted violently. Upon closer inspection, a discarded and partially burned running shoe was also found near the body. There were also injuries to her neck, which were later helpful in figuring out the cause of death, which was manual strangulation. The police couldn't believe their eyes, and after identifying the body, it was confirmed to be 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte. Vanessa's family was immediately informed of her passing, and her mother, in utter disbelief, was left numb from the shock and fear of the situation. Her worst nightmares had quite literally come true. Vanessa was brutally attacked and killed so close to her mother's home and on a trail on which she was very familiar. Rosanna and John were trying to make sense of the situation on how someone could hurt their precious daughter, who was doing nothing but minding her own business in her own hometown. It goes without saying that police immediately knew that this was a case of homicide, and they immediately set out to find Vanessa's killer before it was too late. By looking at the crime scene and the way the perpetrator had tried to remove any traces of evidence by lighting Vanessa's remains on fire, the police knew that it wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately attacked Vanessa and tried to tamper with her body so that they wouldn't get caught. It was an animalistic scene, and the police knew that if they didn't catch the wrongdoer on time, then something grave like this would happen again to another woman. After sending Vanessa's body for an autopsy, a full-blown investigation soon commenced, and the police were looking for any leads or clues left, right, and center. There were traces of DNA found at the crime scene, as well as on Vanessa's body, and it was sent for testing and cross-matching with the criminal database. It was also concluded that the attack on Vanessa took place between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., so it was not long after Vanessa left her mother's house that she was fatally attacked. The place where Vanessa's body was found was secluded, a perfect place for someone with malicious intentions to carry out their dark crimes. On top of that, Vanessa's clothes, cell phone, and headphones were also missing, and it was believed that they were taken by the perpetrator in an effort to further cover their tracks. While searching the crime scene for more evidence, the police found evidence of gasoline, essentially proving that the fire had been deliberately set to cover the criminal's tracks. As Vanessa's body was being analyzed, forensic specialists also found DNA underneath Vanessa's fingernails. This revelation suggested that Vanessa put up a great fight to save herself, and she might have left injuries on her attacker. So police were looking for any suspects with injuries on their faces or arms, because Vanessa probably inflicted those during the final moments of her life. Also, the fact that Vanessa's body was dehumanized and left exposed gave the police a clue that the crime was indeed that of passion. The police were confident that Vanessa's attacker wasn't someone she knew. From the looks of it, it seemed as though the attack on Vanessa was random, which is just as scary. And this left the police in even more confusion as to why a person would do such a vile and evil thing. With all of this information, the police had no choice but to go and make it public, to get Vanessa's case known to everyone around them, in hopes to solve it and catch the perpetrator. On August 11, 2016, 4 days after the discovery of Vanessa's body, Worcester District Attorney Joseph Early Jr. conducted a press conference, and in it, he told the community of Princeton to steer clear of any danger and be vigilant of any suspicious activity, because the killer was still out there at large. Detective Earl also went on to describe the general profile of the killer, based on the evidence that they found at the scene of the crime. The perpetrator was defined to be 20 to 30 years old, a male with minor cuts, bruises, and injuries as a result of the scuffle with Vanessa. As time passed, the police turned to the public for more information about the day of August 7th, and an official tip hotline was also set up. The police received hundreds of tips every single day, which totaled almost 1,300 tips entirely. Several witnesses came forward with promising leads, but 2 of them stood out to the police the most, and they decided to look further into them. The first witness claimed to have seen Vanessa at the Mountainside Market on Hubbardston Road at about 1 p.m. on the day that she disappeared, talking on her cell phone and drinking some water. Another witness came forward with a very eerie detail. They claimed to see a dark-colored vehicle following Vanessa down the same road she was taking a jog on. The car appeared to be making calculated movements and wasn't even being discreet about following Vanessa. Why this witness didn't report this before the crime had occurred, well, we may never know. It's likely they probably thought Vanessa knew the person. After all, this was a shockingly safe town up until this point. This revelation of Vanessa being followed was an alarming discovery for the police, and they decided to look into the car and its appearance on the horrible day of August 7th. But during their investigation, there was one suspicious detail that detectives uncovered. Since the murder of Vanessa caught a lot of media attention, it was connected to another case that had occurred not too long before Vanessa's attack, but in New York. See, there was a 30-year-old there named Karina Vetrano, who was found in a park in Queens, New York City, where she'd gone for a walk alone. There were way too many similarities between Karina and Vanessa's cases and how their bodies were found for police to write this off as a coincidence. Karina was also disrobed, dehumanized, and strangled. This left the police even more confused because Vanessa also lived and worked full-time in New York City. So did the attacker, who was responsible for Karina's death, follow Vanessa all the way to Princeton to carry out another heinous crime? The police had too many questions, and time was running out. While trying to find the link that could relate Karina and Vanessa's cases together, the FBI also got involved in Vanessa's case and came forth with their own attacker profile and other information. According to the FBI, the person responsible for Vanessa's death was someone who knew the Princeton area well, or at least frequented there, because he knew the most secluded areas of Princeton, and he was aware of the neighboring stores as well. The police also received information on Vanessa's phone records, and it was found that it had been turned off at about 2:11 p.m., the same time when it was speculated that the attack on Vanessa took place, helping police to narrow down a very specific timeline. But 3 months after the fact, some incriminating information came forward, and it had to do with the dark-colored car which was apparently following Vanessa. See, another witness came forward and said that they saw a black Ford vehicle with its hood up, parked just around the curb from where Vanessa's body was found. There was also a man in his mid-20s to 30s talking on the phone, and he appeared to be of a medium build and Hispanic. Oddly enough, when the witness passed by the same area again sometime later, the car was still there, although the hood was down and there was no sign of the driver. The police highlighted this information, and a bolo was put out on this vehicle. Another 3 months passed by, and on February 23, 2017, the police came out to the public with even more information about Vanessa's attacker. So remember the DNA retrieved from Vanessa's body? Well, a criminal profile was made based on the DNA, and it was found that the attacker was most likely in his mid-20s to 30s, and he was likely of a medium build and was Hispanic. He had short hair, owned a black SUV or vehicle, and probably was from Princeton. This profile matched the description of the man that the witness saw. The press conference proved to be helpful because 3 weeks later, in March of 2017, a police officer who was on his usual duty spotted a man identical to the description given by the police, driving a black Ford SUV. The officer noted the vehicle's license plate number, and a name popped up when he ran the plates. And it turned out the car belonged to a man named Angelo Colon Ortiz. 31-year-old Angelo Colon Ortiz was a Puerto Rican native who lived with his family and 3 children in Worcester for less than a year before the police discovered his car. He worked as a delivery man for a third-party contractor of FedEx, and alarmingly, he was pretty familiar with the Princeton area as he made tons of deliveries there. Angelo was a quiet guy who did his job and did it well, but according to his neighbors and coworkers, he was defined as a very perverted man. Although he had no criminal history, Angelo had a habit of making very offensive and crude remarks about women in his native language. He sneered at women and generally made them feel uncomfortable. A female coworker also backed up this claim by saying that Angelo once made derogatory remarks about her and another female coworker out loud in Spanish, thinking that the women didn't understand his language, though they did. She also stated, quote, "I had to interact with him on my own. Thank God nothing happened. It was very strange and uncomfortable to be around him." All of this was alarming and eerily coincidental, so the police were adamant about visiting Angelo. Angelo, being Puerto Rican, didn't understand or read or speak English, so a bilingual police officer who spoke Spanish conversed with Angelo and asked him about Vanessa and if he knew anything about her, to which he answered in the negative. Angelo also confirmed that he was not in Princeton at the time of Vanessa's attack. The police then asked for a sample of his DNA, which Angelo offered, and even signed papers that verified his consent for handing over DNA to the police. It's so crazy to me that he offered all of this up to detectives willingly. And that's because when the police compared Angelo's DNA with what was found under Vanessa's fingernails, it was a match. The police finally had their suspect, and on August 15th, 2017, almost a year after Vanessa's tragic passing, Angelo Ortiz was arrested and charged with her murder. Angelo was held on a bail of a staggering $10 million, so there was no way for him to evade the consequences of what he had done to poor Vanessa. After Angelo's arrest, his movements on the tragic day of August 7th were also tracked, and a very shocking piece of information was found. On the same day that Vanessa was attacked, Angelo was seen buying $5 worth of gasoline from a store 6 miles from the crime scene at about 2:35 p.m. The police suspected that Angelo had already killed Vanessa at that point, and he wanted to get rid of the evidence, which is why he bought the gasoline. If you remember, the crime scene had several traces of fire and gasoline, further corroborating this claim. While awaiting trial, police theorized that Angelo was out working his shift when he saw Vanessa jogging on the trail near her home. For whatever reason, Angelo decided to target and terrorize Vanessa, and he proceeded to subdue her, lure her 60 yards into the dense forest, and then violate her. In the end, Angelo strangled Vanessa and robbed her of her cell phone, headphones, and clothes, which were never found after Angelo was arrested. It was believed that he sold the items for money. After fatally attacking Vanessa, Angelo left to buy some gasoline, proceeded to burn Vanessa's body, and left the scene. His motive for attacking Vanessa in the first place was never revealed, but it seems pretty clear to assume his motive was likely sexual. Rather than insisting that Angelo didn't commit the crime, Angelo's attorneys concocted a plan to claim that he was taken advantage of because of a language barrier and had his DNA forcefully taken by investigators. Far as I can tell, this is just straight up not true. A motion was filed on March 16, 2017 to suppress this DNA evidence presented in court, but it was denied. Angelo's trial dragged on for years because of the DNA debacle, and Angelo fired 3 of his lawyers. The Marcotte family was understandably going through immense pain and suffering all throughout this time. They just wanted to get justice for their daughter, but the assailant, since he wasn't pleading guilty, even though there was so much evidence against him, made it nearly impossible for the grieving family to see the end of this nightmare. Finally, on January 11, 2022, after the motion was denied, the prosecution offered a plea deal to Angelo after discussing the terms with the Marcotte family. On November 2, 2022, Angelo pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and robbery, and he was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole in 2067. Angelo was 36 years old at the time, which means he'll be eligible for parole when he's 81, if he even lives that long. During his sentencing, Angelo was deprived of any emotion. He was stoic and calm, which is just disgusting considering the end of the life of an innocent woman who hadn't even provoked him. He never showed any remorse, never shed a tear, and accepted his fate without a single word. Vanessa's parents went through the unthinkable, having lost their daughter in such a tragic and brutal way. What was so saddening was that Vanessa's father, John, passed away from declining health conditions just 10 days before the sentencing of Angelo. He wasn't even able to put the situation to bed before passing away, but I feel very confident that he was able to find the peace he so desperately was seeking after reuniting with his daughter. At the sentencing, Vanessa's mother and John's ex-wife, Rosanna, stated that John died of a broken heart and unbearable grief caused by Angelo. The Marcotte family, even though the sentencing was next to nothing compared to the loss that they endured, were satisfied that Angelo was now in prison, preventing him from ever hurting anyone else ever again. But it's hard to even wrap your head around the fact that he could have ever done this to someone in the first place. That's the thought that hurts more than anything else. This man claimed a promising young woman's life, and for what? One fleeting moment of pleasure? The Marcotte family is still healing every single day from this heavy loss, and they want to spread awareness for other women too. So, as a tribute to their daughter, who loved all things sports and athletics, the Marcotte family founded the Vanessa T. Marcotte Foundation in 2017. It started as a platform to help find Vanessa's killer, and now it's grown into a non-profit organization that conducts self-defense workshops and classes for women, and spreads awareness against all kinds of harassment that women face on a day-to-day basis. This case is nothing short of a terrifying nightmare for women everywhere. Angelo and Vanessa didn't even know each other. There was no animosity or ill will for there to be a clear motive for him to brutally attack her and take her life. This man literally just saw a good-looking young woman running by and decided, yeah, I want that. Angelo was an evil man who simply wanted to terrorize a woman, any woman. From the remarks of his coworkers, he seemed like a guy who saw women as nothing more than an item to be played with and then tossed aside. Nothing more. The lack of respect is just appalling. The fact that Vanessa's attack was so random makes everything all the more chilling, and it really goes to show that there are monsters hiding in plain sight. For decades, even hundreds of years, women have been constantly victims of harassment, catcalling, and so much worse. This is why many women tend to feel unsafe wherever they go, because cases like this can unfold at any moment in broad daylight without any level of warning. You truly never know when one day might be your last. And that's such a haunting thought if you just let that sink in for a moment. The Vanessa T. Marcotte Foundation has taken a huge step forward in the right direction of a formative vision, to make the world a safe place for women so that they don't have to be afraid to step out of their homes for something as simple as a workout or buying groceries. I get asked all the time why I tend to cover so many more female cases than male cases. And the honest reason is because I just feel like these cases need so much more light shed on them. Men get taken advantage of every single day as well. We all know that, that's true. But the number of occurrences is vastly less when compared to how often women are victimized. And I'm not just talking about the cases like Vanessa's, where these victims lose their lives. I'm not even talking about the cases where women come forward about the abuse they endure. I'm talking about the daily occurrences that women are forced to deal with. The creepy second glances, the off-color remarks about their looks, the unwanted touches, all of it. We need to do something about this, and the Vanessa T. Marcotte Foundation is making great strides at helping women better learn how to identify a potential threat, as well as deal with it accordingly. But there's still a long way to go, and I can only hope that the community and law enforcement agencies as a whole can do something about predators preying on vulnerable women, because the world does not need a repeat of what happened to Vanessa and so many other women. It's time to stop. You've seen those movies where someone gets abducted in broad daylight, endures hours or days of awful torment, but manages to befriend their abductor and ultimately escape from the clutches of violence. Well, those movies and everything behind them is often fictional and planned. But for 14-year-old Abby Hernandez, what happened to her is a tale of survival and incredible resilience. When Abby was kidnapped 3 days before her 15th birthday, the police were on her case from the get-go. But it wasn't until 9 months later when Abby would return home, walking in her front door on her own 2 feet and shocking everyone. The unfortunate kidnapping of Abby Hernandez and how she got away after 9 months of captivity will make you feel like you're watching a horror movie. But this was Abby's real life, or rather her worst nightmare, that changed her life forever. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. No AI narrations, no fake drama, just true crime. So if you're into that kind of thing, be sure to hit subscribe. It's completely free and it just lets you know when I post new videos. Abigail Hernandez, better known by her nickname as Abby, was born on October 12, 1998, to parents Zinnia and Ruben Hernandez in Manchester, New Hampshire. Abby was defined as a very happy and bright girl, and she was pretty easygoing as well and had tons of friends. Abby defined herself as a tomboy, her words, not mine, and she loved sports, but she also loved listening to classic rock music, and her whole style kind of proved this. Abby also had a boyfriend at the time of the case, named Jimmy Campbell. Jimmy and Abby were head over heels for each other. According to everyone who knew Abby and Jimmy and saw them together, he treated her like a princess. Unfortunately, very early on in Abby's life, though, her parents got divorced and Abby and her sister Sarah were then just raised by Zinnia. They were living happily, and even in this monumental change, it didn't really dim Abby's light or her spirit. She wasn't the type of person to let things that were outside of her control get her down, and she was very level-headed and someone who almost always looked on the bright side. But little did Abby know, her life was about to change drastically when she was simply walking home from school on a seemingly normal autumn day in October of 2013. October 9th of 2013 was a regular school day for Abby. She was just 3 days away from turning 15, which was a huge day for most teenagers. Abby got dressed for school in a gray sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and a pair of black heeled boots. Now, these boots were Abby's favorite because her mom, Zinnia, had just gotten them for her as an early birthday gift, and this was actually the first time she was wearing them to school. But if you know anything about new shoes, you know that the first couple of days in a new pair of shoes are often a nightmare. You get blisters all over, your feet hurt, and walking in them sounds and feels terrible. Well, Abby was regretting her decision immediately as she made it to school. According to her best friend Miranda, Abby was walking weirdly all day and her feet hurt a lot. Aside from that, Abby's school day went pretty normal. She attended her classes, took pictures with her friends, and just like that, the school day was over. But back at home, Zinnia couldn't welcome her daughter when she came back home after school because Abby didn't make it back. She usually took the bus to and from school, but Zinnia also knew that Abby loved walking back home from school since it's a pretty short walk. So in Zinnia's mind, maybe October 9th was one of those days when Abby decided to walk back home. Though at this point, her mother obviously didn't know about her bad day with her shoes, so that was pretty unfeasible. But soon, afternoon turned into evening, and Abby still hadn't made it home. Zinnia called Abby on her phone, but she wasn't answering, and this was the time when dread took hold of Zinnia and didn't let go. Soon, Zinnia made her way to the school and asked the librarian where Abby was, but the librarian's answer would make Zinnia forget how to breathe. According to the librarian, Abby had left school hours ago on foot. Zinnia immediately went to the investigators and reported 14-year-old Abby Hernandez missing at 7 p.m. that night. The detectives sprung into action immediately, and it didn't take long before word quickly spread around the tiny community of Conway. The investigators got their hands on the school CCTV footage, and they could see Abby leaving the school building and making her way towards her home at about 2:29 p.m. Abby didn't head in any weird or unknown direction. It was just another day like any other. She was wearing all the same clothes that she'd been wearing, and she had her backpack slung over her shoulder. Nothing suggested to the police that she was running away or anything like that. Nothing was missing from Abby's home either, so her disappearance was really weird. The investigators still asked their usual round of questions, and they were mainly concerned with whether Abby was feeling or behaving differently or contemplating running away from something. Everyone who knew Abby said that this was crazy talk. Everyone told the detectives that Abby's 15th birthday was in just days, and she was actively planning it, obsessing over the theme, the menu, and how many friends that she would have to invite. She wouldn't just up and leave everything and everyone behind. All of her friends essentially said the same thing, that this just wasn't what Abby would do. Luckily, the investigators were working at the speed of light, plastering Abby's face everywhere in the media, asking people around town and looking for clues that could lead to Abby. In the meantime, a huge search for Abby was conducted. A lot of volunteers came forward and searched far and wide for her, hoping that they would find her, but sadly they didn't. There were ground and aerial searches, and even the FBI got involved in Abby's case pretty early on. By the time a few short days had passed, hundreds of tips had poured into the police station. The investigators went through each and every one of them, hoping to get some kind of credible information on Abby's case. They also frequently held press conferences to notify the public of any recent developments in the case. But everyone was still on edge, because there was no clue where Abby was. A website called Bring Abby Home was also set up, and it featured numerous photos and videos of Abby. Just 3 days later, it was Abby's 15th birthday. But there was no celebration. Rather, the Hernandez family held a vigil for Abby, and the community gathered and sang happy birthday and prayed that she'd make it back safe. Zinnia was going through a really hard time, but I'm sure this goes without saying. She was trying to stay hopeful for Abby, and she had to be strong for her other daughter, Sarah, but those moments, well, she had times when she felt hopeless and empty. Meanwhile, the detectives were still working their hardest to get this case solved. They checked Abby's cell phone records. The phone was untraceable after Abby went missing, but her last location pinged about a mile away from her home. The investigators also checked text messages, but nothing stood out to them. Abby last texted her boyfriend, Jimmy, who was on his way back home from school as well, though he took the bus. The police did question Jimmy, since he was the last person that Abby spoke to, but they soon realized that Jimmy and Abby's relationship was normal and loving, and there was no way that Jimmy could have been involved in Abby's disappearance. Well, fast forward to November 6th, 2013, almost a month into Abby's disappearance. Zinnia was at home, and she picked up the mail. As she was going through it, her eyes stopped at one of the letters, which was dated October 23rd, marking 2 weeks since Abby's disappearance. Zinnia just had a feeling that this letter was important, and when she ripped it open and read it, well, she then read it again and again, because this letter was from Abby. It was her handwriting, but some of the words were kind of unusual, and Zinnia knew that this wasn't how Abby spoke or wrote, but she knew that it was Abby. The letter detailed how Abby loved her family and that she was safe, but she couldn't tell them where she was. In the letter, Abby confirmed that she had run away and ended it with her telling her mother to keep hoping. Zinnia immediately gave the letter to investigators, and it was a shock to everyone. Had Abby really run away? Why would she do that? And how did none of her friends know about this? But as soon as the detectives saw the letter, they knew that Abby was not a runaway. It all just seemed too perfect, too scripted, and luckily the police didn't drop the investigation. The detectives also tested the letter, and it had Abby's DNA on it, so she was certainly the one who wrote it, but the detectives did not believe that the contents of the letter were constructed by Abby herself. The investigators immediately released this information to the public, hoping for any progress in the investigation. But just like that, 3 more months passed by without hearing anything from Abby or finding her. But let's fast forward to March 17th of 2014, when a woman was driving down a road 30 miles from Conway when she accidentally hit someone else's car. When the driver of the opposing car emerged, he was armed, and he proceeded to strike the woman multiple times with the weapon. It was a horrific attack, and I'm sure the woman was beyond terrified, but right after this, the violent man was obviously arrested. But what does this random attack have to do with Abby's disappearance? Well, the police just couldn't shake the feeling that this attacker could have had something to do with Abby's disappearance. They didn't make their reasoning public knowledge, but for one reason or another, something about this guy just didn't feel right. And it turns out this man was 34-year-old Nate Kibbe. Nate was an avid firearm collector and an overall bizarre guy. Not only was he violent, but he had strong opinions on the Constitution, arms rights, and all the things that go with that. You know the type I'm talking about. This is the kind of guy that believes the F in F-150 stands for freedom. But anyway, after arresting Nate, the investigators wanted to confiscate all of his firearms, dozens of them. And surprisingly, Nate didn't resist. But when the detectives got to Nate's home in a remote area several miles from Conway, they immediately noticed a sizable shipping container tucked away in his backyard. It stuck out like a sore thumb, and they even asked Nate what the deal with this container was. Nate immediately went into defensive mode and told the investigators that they were only there for the firearms, and that was all they were going to get. The police did leave the property after this small exchange, but they had a very bad feeling about this shipping container. They kind of poked around at first, but Nate was right. The police were only there for his firearms, so that's all they were legally allowed to look for. So after a few short hours of collecting the evidence they came for, they walked away, never knowing that just beyond that shipping container door was Abigail Hernandez. Nathaniel Kibbe, a very eccentric and strange man, was Abby's abductor. But how did Nate, a stranger to Abby, kidnap her? What did he want from her? And why did he target Abby specifically? Well, for that, we need to go all the way back to the fateful day when Abby originally went missing. As Abby was walking out of the school that day, she'd actually missed the bus by just a few seconds. Her feet hurt a lot because of her new boots, but she really had no choice but to make the small walk to her home. As she was texting her boyfriend Jimmy, she saw a car pull up from the corner of her eye. It was a 30-something-year-old man driving, and he noticed Abby's limp and offered her a lift. Abby, grateful for the man's seemingly kind gesture, agreed and got into the stranger's car, and this was a big mistake. But Abby had no idea. After all, Conway's a relatively quiet and safe area, at least as far as Abby knew. But rather than take her home, this man drove to an isolated parking lot, and that's when Abby knew that something was very wrong. She tried to let the driver drop her off right there, but that was when he armed himself and completely subdued Abby. This man, if you haven't put two and two together already, was Nate Kibbe, and he was out looking for someone, anyone that he could terrorize. Nate proceeded to tie Abby's hands and blindfolded her, and even made her crouch down in the leg space of the passenger seat so that no one could see her. After what felt like forever, the car stopped and Abby was pulled out of the car and pushed onto something soft. Turns out it was a dirty mattress, and as soon as Abby's blindfold was removed, she took in her surroundings. The floors were metal, the room was small, and there were latches on the door. The walls of the small room were padded to make it soundproof, and this time Abby saw her abductor wearing a mask that was a golden Halloween mask. Nate threatened Abby that if she ever tried to leave or make a noise, then there would be consequences. I can't even imagine what Abby must have been feeling. The words scared and terrified don't even shine a candle on what Abby was experiencing. Sadly, almost immediately, the cycle of torture and abuse began for Abby. Nate was a disgusting and sadistic piece of work. Even though she was already locked up inside this giant storage container, Nate continued to keep her bound for days on end. Worst of all, he would attack her with anything from a stun gun to a shock collar, just for fun. Needless to say, on top of this, she was also repeatedly taken advantage of. Initially, all Abby could do was endure the abuse and pray that she made it out alive. Even though she was subjected to the worst possible situation, she knew one thing. She wanted to live, and she wanted to make it back home. During her first few weeks of captivity, while the detectives and Abby's family were doing press conferences, Nate would terrorize Abby by telling her that everyone was looking for her. This was such a sick and twisted way of making Abby feel miserable and emotionally and mentally helpless. She knew everyone she loved was out there just a few short miles away, desperately looking for her. But she also knew, chances were, they weren't going to make it in time. Abby watched her mom tearing up in front of the cameras. But as much as Nate's form of terrorizing was hurtful for Abby, it also gave her purpose. Purpose to live, purpose to hang in there, and purpose to quite possibly escape. 2 weeks into captivity, Nate ordered Abby to write that letter to her mother, and that was the same letter that she would receive on November 6th. In Nate's head, this was a way of misleading the police from the investigation. So we have confirmation that Abby indeed wrote the letter, and she even etched the words help and kidnap with her nails while she was writing it. But unfortunately, Nate was smarter than that and he found out about it. Abby was terrified about what he would do to her, but he just made her write another letter, and after inspecting that one, he mailed it out. But the abuse didn't stop. 6 months into captivity, Abby realized something. She had power over Nate. She could easily manipulate him. It was a revelation of sorts, and she had to give it a try. Abby talked to Nate about normal things like two friends would, and just as Abby suspected, Nate was quick to form a weird bond of sorts with her. Nate would call Abby the closest thing he had to a daughter, which is a whole new level of what the heck. Nate would also sit with Abby and talk to her about his life and his views on the Constitution. He'd give Abby books to read, and also removed her blindfold so that Abby now knew for sure what Nate looked like. Speaking of books, Nate gave Abby a cookbook, and it had the name Nate Kibbe written on it. So this was the first time in 6 months of captivity that Abby knew Nate's name. Abby found out that Nate was a huge fan of Ayn Rand, a Russian-born American author who was known for developing a philosophical system called objectivism. Nate was also fond of the Gadsden flag and libertarianism, and he would talk to Abby about these things for hours as if he was teaching a student. Nate also made counterfeit money, and this was his way of getting back at the government that he hated so passionately. At one point, Abby even helped him out, all to gain his trust and make herself look as non-threatening as possible. Finally, the abuse Abby endured lessened, but it didn't stop completely. He began to see street workers, and get this, he paid them in counterfeit money. So not only was Nate using the services of adult workers, but he also scammed them, which is, once again, just unbelievable. Well, this would come back to bite him, and this would ultimately be Abby's ticket to freedom. Nate made Abby write one more letter before his interaction with the investigators about the firearms and the questions about the shipping container. The detectives didn't know it then, but they were so close to Abby, but they couldn't do anything. This interaction made Nate even more scared, and he confronted Abby and told her, quote, she knew too much. He also tried to relocate Abby, but because Abby was blindfolded, she didn't know where she was being taken. In reality, though, Nate was only messing with her, and he took her into his car, drove in circles, and then brought her back to the same shipping container. But remember how Nate was seeing adult workers at the time? Well, one of them was a 27-year-old woman named Lauren Monday, and Nate had obviously scammed her by giving her fake money. When Lauren went to the store to buy something the next day, that was when she realized that the money was fake. Furious, Lauren called Nate and went off on him, even threatening to go to the police. Well, even though Nate was smart and he didn't give Lauren his real name, well, he wasn't the brightest, because the email that he'd given to Lauren had his full name on it, and Lauren was able to describe Nate's car to the detectives too. So after the call with Lauren, Nate barged into the bunker and container where Abby was, and he was angry, but also nervous. But Abby knew better than anyone not to poke the bear, so she remained calm and asked him what was wrong. That was when Nate went on a rant, and Abby listened to everything. She was used to it by now, and she didn't want to be on the receiving end of Nate's abuse, so even though she didn't want to, she listened to Nate rant, which was a good thing, because what happened next was something that even Abby didn't expect. Nate approached Abby, handed her a plastic bag with her clothes in it, and said, "I need to get you out of here." Abby thought that Nate was going to take her somewhere else again, but Nate had different plans. He drove, and Abby was on pins and needles the whole time. Sure, Abby had gotten comfortable with Nate, and she could guess what he would do most of the time, but this was different. When Abby looked out of the window, familiarity and realization hit her like a freight train. Nate was taking Abby back to the same place from where he kidnapped her. He stopped the car, told Abby to get out, and without wasting any time or asking any questions, Abby got out. She slammed the door shut and saw Nate drive away. Abby was in a complete state of disbelief. The feeling of excitement of being free was bubbling inside of her, but she was also scared that Nate would come back any minute and take her back to that disgusting bunker. Still in denial, Abby made the short walk back to her home wearing the same clothes that she had on 9 months ago, and she opened the door and called out for her mom. Zinnia was in the living room, drowning in grief, when she heard Abby's voice. Zinnia truly thought that she was hallucinating. When she saw Abby with her own 2 eyes, Zinnia was thrust all the way back to that night in October, when all she wanted was for Abby to walk through that front door. The level of emotion that was running through these two is unlike anything you could imagine. All Zinnia ever wanted, literally the only thing she thought about, was getting her daughter back home. Now, without any warning or build-up whatsoever, her daughter just walked back into her life safe and sound. Abby was now home, but Nate was still out there, and it wasn't easy for Abby to open up, and understandably so. Nate, before letting Abby go, threatened her that if she ever went to the police, then he would come after her and her family, and she wouldn't like the consequences. This truly scared Abby, and she would do anything to keep her family out of danger, even keep quiet about her abductor. Because of this, the public had very mixed feelings about Abby and her disappearance. A lot of people accused Abby of lying and said that she merely ran away and that the whole kidnapping story was a ruse to hide something else. Everyone questioned whether Abby's disappearance was even real or not. It was such a traumatizing moment for Abby and her family. That same community who was there for Zinnia throughout the entire ordeal was now turning against her and her daughter. Luckily, with the police's help, Abby finally gained enough courage to reveal who her abductor was, and in 2014, Nathaniel Kibbe was arrested. It took almost 3 years for the state to build a case against Nate, and he was facing almost 205 separate charges involving making counterfeit money, sexual assault, and kidnapping of Abby Hernandez. Nate was eventually found guilty, obviously, and sentenced to 45 to 90 years in prison, and at his sentencing, a very familiar person made her appearance: Abby Hernandez. Her statement on May 16th of 2016 was so moving and powerful, and her bravery is something we could all learn from. Abby walked into the courtroom that day, looked Nate in the eyes, and told him she forgave him for everything he had done to her. Because of Nate, Abby didn't take any moment in her life for granted anymore. Her abduction, as traumatic and horrific as it was, changed her perspective on life, and she now vowed to never take another sunset, another second, another happy moment in her life for granted. And she explained that she appreciates her freedom all the more after her abduction. As of now, Abby is a hairdresser and a proud mother of a child that she loves to death. She's living her life peacefully and privately, and we can only hope that she's moving on and healing from this horrible and life-altering trauma. Abby was and is a fighter. Even when she was faced with the worst possible situation and outcome, she continued to press on, not only for herself, but for her family. What Abigail went through was truly unimaginable. You cannot make this stuff up. But her perseverance, her bravery, even when staring right into the face of evil, well, it leaves a lesson for us all to learn. To never give up, even when the odds are completely stacked against us. What if someone told you back in the 80s or 90s that you'd be hailing a cab on your touchscreen phone in the not-so-distant future? You'd think it'd be impossible. Well, that wasn't until 2002 when someone came up with this exact idea, and by 2009, Uber came into being, and other online cab services followed suit. Today, online cab service apps are a staple on many people's phones. Well, in May of 2017, 34-year-old Grant Nelson was an Uber driver, alongside juggling 2 more jobs. When he got a request for a ride that was a few blocks away from his location, he couldn't say no. But 2 minutes into the ride, Grant would lose his life after he was mercilessly attacked by the very person who hailed that taxi. The case of Grant Nelson is so tragic, and the saddest part is that it could have all been avoided. But the most unsettling part of this whole case is the person who committed the crime, because who they were and what caused them to snap, well, no one saw it coming. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. If you're watching this video, that probably means you're interested in true crime, and that's pretty much all we do here. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and it just lets you know when I post new videos. It was Memorial Day on May 30th of 2017, a little after 3:20 a.m. It was the middle of the night. A condominium complex located on the 7200 block of Touhy Avenue in Skokie, Illinois, was exactly how you'd picture an apartment complex at 3 in the morning. There was no hustle and bustle. People were probably snoozing after the busy Memorial Day gatherings with their families, and the lobby and parking lot were quiet. But not for long. The apartment complex security guards noticed a gray 2014 Hyundai Sonata making its way into the parking lot. But as soon as the driver's side door opened, any semblance of peace was shattered. A badly injured man, holding his bleeding hand and chest, was seen staggering his way towards the condominium lobby. As soon as he got there, he started banging on the lobby doors and incessantly pressing the buzzer for any help. Within seconds, this condominium complex and the people residing in it were awoken by buzzing sounds and banging. The badly injured man also screamed at the top of his lungs, causing almost all the residents of the apartment complex to wake up with a start. Several witnesses heard the man yelling the words, "Help me, I'm going to die." Some of the residents sprung into action and called 911. And within minutes, 911 was getting littered with calls, asking for help and emergency services at this specific apartment complex in Skokie. Witnesses also saw the car pull out from the parking lot, but they had bigger things to worry about. The man was in grave condition when the investigators and emergency services arrived, as he lay on the ground, barely clinging to life. Luckily, though, he was still able to talk to the police, which is just incredible. The injured man was able to tell the police that he was an Uber driver and that he picked up a passenger from a local Walmart. He proceeded to tell the police that the passenger launched an attack on him as soon as they entered the vehicle. All the while, he was fighting for his life. The man was in terrible condition, with injuries to his torso, arms, head, and chest. He was teetering on the line of life and death, and he was immediately loaded into an ambulance and taken to St. Francis Hospital. It was a short drive away from the scene, but tragically, due to the severity of his wounds, the man did not survive, and he lost his life at the hospital. The paramedics couldn't do anything. This man was hanging on to the last threads of life, and sadly, he succumbed to his wounds. As tragic as the man's death was, the investigators had 2 main tasks on their hands. First, they had to identify this man and notify his family of his passing. And second, they needed to catch the perpetrator. who was the person who drove this man to his untimely and brutal death? And most importantly, where was the assailant now? Were they attacking other people at that moment? The police needed to find the wrongdoer immediately. Well, a bunch of police officers got on this task, whereas the rest of them got to know who the victim was. He was 34-year-old Grant Nelson. Grant Nelson, an Uber driver, had lost his life so brutally and within minutes. But who was he? Well, Grant was born in 1982 in Willamette, Illinois. He loved classical music, and he and his sister Alex had this in common. They loved to listen to music together, talk about it, and discover new bands or artists together. And it was kind of their thing. Grant was also passionate about acting. He did some side gigs and tried to make his mark in acting, and he also had a headshot produced for his acting resume. He also loved watching movies, partly for acting inspiration, and he adored animals. Grant's brother Todd said that Grant was a pretty level-headed guy. He described Grant as a kind soul in a cruel world, and he aspired to be more like his brother. Grant was genuine, empathetic, and loyal. Jeff Teal, Grant's friend since high school, said that he could always count on Grant to make him smile. Grant was with his family just hours before he accepted that Uber ride. It was Memorial Day, and Grant spent the evening with his family eating good food and enjoying the company of his loved ones. Just a few hours ago, Grant was happy, smiling, and most of all alive. But now, he was gone, and he took a piece of his family with him, and they would never be the same again. But let's get back to May 30th, because as tragic and harrowing as Grant's passing was, it was up to the detectives to give him and his family justice. And it didn't take the investigators long to spot a trail that led them straight to Grant's killer. And it all started with a Cubs sweatshirt. Well, a red-stained Cubs sweatshirt that was found discarded on the road. If you remember, when Grant was banging on the lobby doors for help after getting out of his car drove away. The detectives assumed that it was the passenger who used the car to flee the scene. Luckily, the car was found nearby, crashed into a median, and, well, let's just say that it looked like a mess. It was clear to the police that Grant was attacked in his car. Everything was red, and the back door of the car was also smeared with red. Fortunately, it looked like the perpetrator had left a trail for the detectives to follow. While some officers got to searching the car for any evidence, the rest of the squad spotted a discarded Cubs sweatshirt near the car, and it was also smeared in red stains, which only added to the police's horror. Whatever Grant endured during that very short but very brutal attack was harrowing. As the investigators rounded a corner, they noticed something, or rather someone. A young girl was crouched under an air conditioning unit in a building, and she was only wearing leggings and underwear. It didn't take long for the detectives to realize that the sweatshirt they'd found belonged to this girl. But what astounded the police was what the girl had in her hands. She was holding a machete in one hand and a knife in the other. The detectives were dumbfounded, partly because of the weapons she had in her hand, but mainly because she looked so young. She didn't look nearly as old as Grant, but the investigators had other more important things at hand, and one of them was disarming her. Well, it was harder than they thought, because as the detectives approached her and demanded she drop her weapons, the girl ignored them and wasn't letting things go. This left the detectives with no choice but to subdue her with a taser, which caused her to drop the weapons, and the investigators were able to handcuff her. Meanwhile, the officers in the car pulled out Grant's phone and checked his Uber app. They wanted to know who the last passenger was, and when they checked Grant's history, the name on the app was Eliza. Well, it was a first name, and it was enough, but within minutes, the mysterious girl was identified as Eliza Wozni. And get this, she was only 16 years old. A 16-year-old girl was the one who brutally attacked Grant in his car at 3 a.m, a teenager. The detectives were blindsided by these facts. They needed answers right away. Why would a teenager attack Grant so viciously? What was the reason? Well, the only way to find things out was to talk to the teenager herself. And it turns out Eliza Wozni attended Taft High School, and she lived with her mom, who was a single parent on the north side of Chicago. Eliza also attended a therapeutic day school, and she had a very private life, and her social media was about as normal as it gets. She had a bunch of pictures of herself, and her About Me wrote, "I will always be myself," and absolutely nothing appeared unusual. Eliza was also registered on Kids Casting, a talent hunting website for child actors. She had a few pictures on there as well, so by all accounts, 16-year-old Eliza was a seemingly normal teenage girl. The police also found no previous criminal history, and nothing else to suspect she had a single ounce of bad blood in her. It was all so confusing, and the detectives knew that they had to backtrack. They remembered Grant telling them that he picked Eliza up from a local Walmart, so that was as good a place as any to start. But when the investigators checked their surveillance footage, they got their upteenth surprise of the day. Eliza was seen walking into Walmart at about 2:36 a.m. She was seen walking into the store, picking up a knife and a machete, ripping them out of their packaging, and walking straight out the exit without paying for them. Eliza literally stole the murder weapons from Walmart, and if that wasn't astonishing enough, no one stopped her from walking out of Walmart with the stolen goods. It wasn't like she was hiding the things in her sleeves or shirt or something. She was seen walking with the machete and knife in her hands while she casually and calmly just made her way out of Walmart. Ironically, Eliza hailed 3 Uber rides that night, her inexplicable adventures starting at about 1:25 a.m. on May 30th. The first Uber ride took her to a train station in DePlain, Illinois. Now, we don't know what she did there, but almost an hour later at 2:18, she booked another Uber, and this one took her to Walmart in Lincolnwood, this being the Walmart from which she shoplifted. After walking out of the Walmart, Eliza walked around a bit before she requested her final Uber ride with none other than Grant at 3:18 a.m. Grant was a few blocks away from Eliza's location, and he accepted the ride for some extra cash, this being just a few short hours after having dinner with his family. Within minutes, though, the ride turned deadly, and Eliza, out of nowhere, attacked Grant with the weapons that she'd stolen from Walmart. Grant suffered almost half a dozen wounds, and that was when he made an abrupt stop at the apartment complex, practically jumped out of his car and screamed for help before tragically passing away. Eliza, after the attack, got into the driver's seat, but she only got so far before crashing into a median. That was when she got out, discarded her sweatshirt, but still had the weapons in her hands. She made a stop at a building on the 7300 block of Lincoln Avenue, where she was later discovered and arrested by the police. Now, there are a lot of things that are very unsettling about this case. First of all, why was Eliza even allowed to go out in the middle of the night? What was she doing? Where were her parents, for one? And was she looking for a victim, or did something provoke her to do the unimaginable? Keep in mind, Eliza took 3 Uber rides, and the first 2 drivers were unharmed. So what happened during that final ride that led Eliza to attack Grant? Secondly, why didn't anyone at Walmart stop Eliza with the stolen items? Even the CCTV footage showed 2 or 3 people in close vicinity to Eliza, and none of them reported her for shoplifting. If only someone had reported her then, the detectives would have come and arrested Eliza for shoplifting, and maybe the attack on Grant could have been avoided. Well, after the police arrested Eliza, she refused to explain anything. She wouldn't reveal her motive and really clammed up in general, hardly speaking to the detectives at all. The investigators needed to talk to people who knew Eliza to figure out why she did what she did, because the murderer, a teenager, was not cooperating. When the detectives got to know that Eliza attended a therapeutic day school, their ears perked up. They wondered, could Eliza be battling some sort of mental health issue that caused her to spiral and commit such a heinous crime? Now, I'm not saying that people with mental illnesses get a free pass to do anything they please, but in Eliza's case, the police needed to uncover the motive so that they could at least make sense of what was going on. According to Mark Grishaber, principal of Taft High School, Eliza was in and out of therapeutic schools all the time. What's interesting is her case manager even told the principal that she shouldn't have even been enrolled in that school in the first place. So why was she eventually enrolled? Well, we'll never know. We also don't know if the investigators conducted any toxicology reports or any psychiatric evaluations on Eliza. And even if they have, the results of these evaluations at least haven't been made public, which makes this case all the more frustrating, but it is understandable considering she's a minor, or at least she was at the time of the case. But one thing that the police did rule out was the possibility of self-defense. Eliza had no defensive wounds on her body, and nothing pointed towards the fact that Grant made her uncomfortable during the ride, or that there was a reason that Eliza attacked him in the first place. But if Grant didn't provoke Eliza in some way, then what did? If Eliza thought that she could get out of this by staying quiet, that wasn't going to happen. She was going to stand in front of a court and face the consequences of her actions, regardless of her reasoning. Eliza was arrested and charged with first-degree murder on May 31st, just a day after she committed the crime. She was kept at a juvenile facility, and it was ultimately decided that she would be tried as an adult, despite her obvious struggles with mental health and quite possibly her previous trauma. Speaking of being behind bars, Eliza was not an ideal prisoner. She racked up over 450 violations while being held in prison. The violations ranged from unauthorized movement to attacking prison guards to attacking other prisoners. It was also reported that Eliza would repeatedly bite, kick, and strike any prisoner or prison guard if they tried to touch her. This girl was insane, and likely clinically so. To add to that, Eliza also resorted to harming herself in prison multiple times and had to be taken to Stroger's Hospital in Cook County about 6 times. At one point, she even wrote the word "die" in big red letters on the wall of her prison cell after harming herself, and it was all just so disturbing. To top this off, a fellow detainee also came forward and shared some very eerie details about Eliza that she learned after being left alone with her. According to this person, Eliza wanted to go on a killing spree, and she had loads of information and knowledge on how to dispose of body parts without getting caught. This was highly alarming behavior for a teenager. I mean, who in their right mind fantasizes about harming people and getting away with it? Now, watching true crime shows and spitballing ideas around, that's one thing. Those are complete innocent fantasies. Usually. But this girl actually wanted to carry out those crimes, seemingly just for the thrill. There's something seriously wrong with this kid. But the prosecution also offered a plea deal to avoid going through the painful process of a trial. And to my surprise, in August of 2020, Eliza Wozni, who was now 19, accepted their offer. After speaking with prosecutors, Eliza pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of 34-year-old Grant Nelson. On August 20th of 2020, she was ultimately sentenced to 27 years in prison. Now, it's great that Eliza spared the court the trouble of a trial, but one question still remained. Why? Why did she do this to Grant? During the hearings and even the sentencing, Eliza kept her head down and didn't converse with anyone. If anything, she only ever interacted with her mom by smiling at her during the hearings in the courtroom, but she never once gave any indication about why she claimed Grant's life. Now, Eliza will probably get out of prison in her 40s, so she'll still have a lot of life left to live. But even though she's behind bars right now, you can't help but feel unsettled about her being released when we don't really know why she harmed Grant so callously in the first place. Grant's family primarily blames Walmart for their son's death. And I mean, can you blame them? There were a handful of Walmart employees and security workers when Eliza walked in and basically stole the murder weapons in front of everyone. Surely someone must have seen Eliza doing this, but even if they did not report it to the police. They literally just let her walk out the front door. Where were the security personnel during this? If it's their job to do anything at all, it's monitor the exits. At the end of July of 2017, just 2 months after Grant's passing, the Nelson family sued Walmart along with Allied Universal and Monterey Security Consultants. These were the companies that provided security services to Walmart. Walmart, on the other hand, stressed that the store officials did alert a third-party security agency to a possible shoplifting incident. But even if they did, we all know by now that nothing was done to stop Eliza. Now, whether this is true or not, who knows? It kind of feels like Walmart board members probably just trying to pass the buck, but that's just me being cynical. There's really no evidence to prove this whatsoever. But as of making this video, there have been no further updates about the Walmart lawsuit, so we don't know if the Nelson family was successful or if the charges were eventually just dropped. Either way, Grant's funeral was held on June 2nd of 2017. And as you can guess, everyone was bereaved. Grant's sister Alex was still in denial that her older brother was even gone. She felt like she was still waiting for Grant to come walking through the door any minute and flash his $1 million smile at her, but this never happened. We can only hope that Grant's loved ones can move on with their lives after this devastating loss, which is way easier said than done because their whole world shattered in a matter of hours, showing everyone just how cruel and uncertain the future can be sometimes. The attack on Grant infuriated and scared many online cab drivers, and they all took to their social media to rage out, and they especially targeted Eliza's social media with their rage. Everyone was just bitter, and they didn't want Eliza to get away with a slap on the wrist just because she was a teenager, even though she luckily was tried as an adult. Some comments were downright violent. People suggested that Illinois bring the death penalty back in Eliza's case or give her the harshest sentence possible. The public was seething with anger, and rightfully so, because the comments were getting so threatening and violent that Eliza's Facebook was deactivated shortly after, which is probably for the best. Fighting violence with more violence rarely ends well. This case is frustrating on so many levels. The number one reason being, we still have no idea why Eliza did what she did. This drives me nuts when convicted criminals do this because, you already got caught. You already got stuck with a prison sentence, in her case, guaranteed 27 years. Why not at least explain what you did? Even if you just did it for the thrill of it, what's the harm in just saying it at this point? I guess more than anything, it's likely just some kind of power move. Some think that mental health may have had a hand in this case, and that certainly makes the most sense. But investigators haven't come up with any official motive yet, so it could be anything. But I'm sure that we can all agree that this was heartless, cruel, and senseless. As far as the official details go, Eliza and Grant didn't even know each other, so they were strangers, which adds such a terrifying layer to this whole case. Yes, stranger danger is a thing, but teenagers committing horrific and unspeakable crimes that lead to death? If that doesn't send chills down your spine, I don't know what will. This was all just so sudden, so unexpected, and unnecessarily cruel. Usually, it's the other way around, and the unsuspecting and unaware teens are the targets of monsters with vicious intentions. But this case turned the tables rather quickly, and it left everyone feeling helpless and in fear of their lives. Cases like this can't help but make your skin crawl. It begs the question, are we ever truly safe? And as scary as it may seem, I think the answer is a resounding no. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Thomas Howell and Jennifer Sauer. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I appreciate every single one of you guys that have done that. We just hit 100 members this past week, and I'm so appreciative of you guys. Thank you so much. But also, don't forget, we have True Crime Stories t-shirts now available, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and it just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.